Welcome to NatSat. My name is Paul Spanos, and today we have with us for immigration issues to discuss Kelly Leeds. And Kelly, you are a registered migration agent, the perfect person for the subject. And today we're going to discuss about working visas and all visas related to work and find work, temporary or permanent, in Australia. Let's start with those labor agreements. There are some companies that they do have a specific agreement with immigration. How does this work?
Okay, it's a specific agreement between the government and the company, and there's various departments involved. The important thing to understand is, as we said, with working visas, you have an occupation list. There's two occupation lists. I like to call them the short list, which is a SOL, and the long list, which is a CSOL, and has the SOL in it. Okay. So according to which visa you're going to be applying for, you have to be either an occupation in the SOL list or in the CSOL. Yes. Now, there's a lot of occupations, a lot, that are not on those lists. Yes. Okay. However, we find at times that there are needs in the market for specific occupations. There is no workers here. Foreign workers are required because of special skills, maybe because of special language skills, or because we don't have those skills in Australia. Yes. And it usually happens with larger companies, and they may need to employ maybe 10 or 20 people, or continue to have a cycle of people coming in for that work. So instead of putting that occupation in the list, there is an opening that allows for an organisation or a company to actually put an application through to the government requesting a labour agreement for a specific occupation, and of course we're talking about specific numbers, specific terms. So what happens is, when that labour agreement is signed, that organisation is allowed to sponsor. They're actually, it's like the sponsor that we have for other purposes, but they're allowed to sponsor people for that specific occupation which is not on the occupation lists. Okay. That means that's the only difference it makes. And that is an agreement between the company and immigration only? It's with various government departments. And I think what we need to do is, I think that yes, immigration department is obviously involved, and I think the confusion that happens there is because Department of Immigration is also involved, people start to think that the company decides and gives the visas. No, they don't. Department of Immigration assesses your visa application, your qualifications and everything, just as if you were asking for a 457 for the motor mechanic shop down the road. Okay. It's exactly the same thing. And the only difference is that the company is getting involved in us for recruitment, specifically to look for those people. But those people, well, every company actually is recruiting and finding a foreign worker. Yes. I mean, a big car company that wants motor mechanics that are specialised in European models does recruitment. But motor mechanics are on the list, so they don't have to have a labour agreement. Okay? All right. So they just go ahead, put in an application, get assessed as a sponsor, and then they find Peter, who's a really good mechanic on these European models, and we would like to sponsor him and bring him in. So then they're an approved sponsor because that part has been approved by immigration. They put in a nomination application and nominate Peter. I'm just using the name. And immigration assesses that application and says, we accept your nomination for Peter and why you would want Peter's skills in your company. And then comes a turn of Peter's visa application, and they assess Peter and Peter's qualifications. It is possible that they might not approve Peter. Okay. Now, Peter, in this example, comes to work with this company. Can he be flexible? For example, the company calls him for the next 2 years, all right? Contract or something. How flexible is Peter to change employer? Okay, we have to keep in mind, when you are under a sponsored visa, We're talking about a temporary working visa, which is up to a maximum of 4 years.
Yes.
You are obliged to always be working for an approved sponsor.
Okay.
Okay. Within your occupation, the visa has an occupation attached to it.
Okay.
You can't come under a visa as a motor mechanic and then go and work as an electrician.
Okay.
Not allowed to. And you can't go and work for somebody who's not an approved sponsor.
That means in this case, that working visa specifically attached to the occupation.
It is. It's very specific to the occupation.
So that's how you need to continue on.
I mean, if somebody has qualifications both as an electrician and as a motor mechanic, and they get a 457 visa as a motor mechanic, and then they decide, I have found somebody who's prepared to sponsor me as an electrician, the working conditions are better, it's a much better opportunity for me, well, by all means, they can apply for another visa.
But that means
it's a new application, okay?
Okay, that's a new application, and they need to have local assessment qualifications for their electrician.
Yes, with an electrician you need licensing, for example. So you need to qualify for that license.
Yes, locally in Australia to be able to do this. So it is restrictive, the working visa, to what you have declared on your application.
Exactly. That's what it also brings in danger. Like with labour agreements, if there's a lot of organisations in Australia, usually if there's so many organisations who ask for labour agreements, they will eventually put it on the list, like they did the drillers some years ago, for the mines. But if there's only one organisation that has a labour agreement for a specific occupation and you stop working for them, well, how easy is it going to be to find a replacing sponsor?
That's right.
So there's no use for your visa anymore, so your visa expires itself, or they actually cancel it on you and you have to leave.
So when you are under that labour agreement occupation, you really restricted to that occupation, and only if there is another employer with the same conditions and has exactly the same agreement can sponsor you.
You're allowed to find a sponsor within 90 days of stopping from the one you are with.
Very, very interesting. We're going to continue about working visas in a moment. Stay with us. We'll continue about that hot topic. Welcome back to NATSAT, and we're going to continue with Kelly to the topic of working related visas in Australia. And Kelly is a registered migration agent. So let's continue with those labor related visas. And if I come here with 457 visa and I have an occupation, and I've got a temporary employment for a couple of years or so, how can I think or help myself, or can this be used as a step to permanent visa in Australia? How does this can connect?
With once you're here on a 457 and so you're under a sponsorship, you have a sponsoring employer, and you continue working with the same employer for 2 years.
Okay.
After the 2 years, the same employer can sponsor you for a permanent visa.
All right.
Okay. Which means the employer will put in an application requesting, nominating you for a permanent visa under his sponsorship. So it's new applications again.
Okay. All right.
Okay. And you, as an applicant, will need to put in a visa application for the permanent visa.
In this case, the employer, they don't have to re-advertise the job, do they?
No.
Because you're working for them.
Because what you've done is, look, you can go straight into the permanent with a sponsor. Okay.
All right.
What happened? We've got the direct entry and we've got the transit entry. Direct entry means an employer may wish to sponsor you for a permanent visa from the word go.
Oh, okay.
So what they do is they put in the full application. The application goes in fully, who they are, blah blah, why they want to nominate you, and all that sort of thing. So they need to get approved for that. Their nomination for you for the permanent is to get approved, you need to apply for the permanent visa. Requirements for the permanent visa is you have to be under 50.
Oh, okay.
Okay. You have to have 6 in IELTS across the board, or the equivalents, because the 186 does allow equivalents.
The IELTS test, we're talking about the English language.
That's right, yes. You have to have a migration skills assessment, which assesses both your qualifications and your work experience. Okay. So that's a direct entry. So if you get approved, it's a permanent visa. There's an obligation to be with your employer for your employer to have you for 2 years, but you are a permanent resident.
Yes.
Okay. So the other way to get to that permanent residency is if you have a 457 temporary visa, which means that you work under your sponsor. You're obliged to always work under a sponsor. You can change sponsors, as I said. You keep with the same employer for 2 continuous years. That same employer can nominate you for a permanent visa for the specific occupation.
All right.
You still have to sit for your IELTS test and get 6s, even though you needed 5s for your 457. You don't need to go through migration skills assessment because your 2 years of working in that occupation with the one employer continuously equals your skills assessment. Okay, so that's the difference that it makes.
But you can't avoid the IELTS test.
You can't avoid the English qualifications.
Okay.
No. I mean, we have to point out for the permanent visas, all right, like all visas, it's not just the IELTS test anymore, but it's the equivalent of the TOEFL and the Cambridge test as well. Okay. But for the 457, it's still just the IELTS.
Okay, that is okay. Then there's a two-way of getting.
That is a transition. Now, if somebody's on a 457 and they've got to do that. That 2 years with the employer has to be complete and the application put in before they turn 50. So somebody who went on a 457 at the age of 49 will not be able to do that.
Okay.
Because they'll be 51 after 2 years.
So they cannot do it.
They can go into direct.
Yes, they can go to direct, but in this case, we have the skill assessments coming proceed that. Okay, how important is for the candidate to find a credible employer? Is there any problem with credibility of companies who sponsor? Okay,
what we're going to point out is that a specific part of the credibility is obviously tested by immigration themselves because they need to approve a sponsor. But
generically, what immigration looks for?
Well, they look at the statements. We have a whole, really, when we do an application of this type, the employer's file is this high, the visa applicants is this high. Okay, because the full financial statements go through, business plans go in, and a lot of times visa applicants don't understand exactly what a sponsor goes through to be able to sponsor them. So I think there has to be an understanding. You know, they do take on certain obligations against the visa applicant.
So not any employer
can... It is a whole process.
It's not an automatic process that any employer can get.
New companies can, but you've got to show the business plan, the growth of your business and everything like that. Financials are taken into account. People that work for you are taken into account. How many people you employ, who are Australians, are you spending money on training because they're obliged to spend money, X amount of money on training. So there's a whole lot of prerequisites that they have to meet to be approved. Now, on the credibility part, of course, there's always the other side, besides the books, where I would say, meet with your employer, find out about them, talk to people about them. Unfortunately, we've had sad cases where people have come on 457s, have been abused. They're not, you know, Fair Work has gotten involved. Fair Work will get involved, even though you're a 457 visa holder.
It is that checking of the employer and the credibility of the employer is not just for the immigration to have the assurance of the employer, it's for the applicant himself.
I would say so.
That's right.
I would say so. Yes. Be sure about it, because unfortunately what happens is people come here under the specific visa especially, and you know they face really hard times. They're too scared to talk because it means that their employment will end and then they will not have another sponsor, and we hear sad cases.
Yes. We're going to continue this on working related visa on the third part of the segment today. Stay with us, we'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back to NATSAT, and we're going to continue with the topic of working related visas. And Kelly, you are so good enlightening us into this subject, and we're talking about sponsorship before, okay? And if I'm a professional, or if I want to come to work in Australia, to have a permanent visa in Australia, to be a migrant if you like, is sponsorship the only way to do it?
No, it's not. And I'm glad you said migrant, because working visas, permanent working visas, are migration visas.
Yes,
okay?
That's right.
So there are other avenues. You don't need to always have a sponsor.
Okay.
It means independently applying for a visa based on your qualifications and your experience. Okay. It's what people normally refer to as the point system visas or the skill select visas.
Okay.
All right. So that means still your occupation has to be on those lists.
Okay.
There's different types of visas under those categories as well, and depending on the type of visa, you also have to be on the specific list, one or the other.
Sometimes there is a bit of a confusion, because you can see on a list a specific occupation, but there's more into that list, and in that occupation might be more screening into what do they mean by this.
Yes.
And sometimes the understanding of one occupation in a European country is completely different to the understanding of the same occupation here. Is it easy accessible, that information? Can you find?
Easily accessible statistics. Australian Bureau of Statistics provides that answer.
Okay.
Okay, which is publicly available to everybody, is what it's called the ANSCO, A-N-Z-S-C-O, list of occupations.
And this is what immigration is using as a definition?
This is what immigration uses as a definition of a position. This is what the skill assessment authorities use.
Okay. So before I apply, it's a good idea to...
It's a good idea to go through. You have to cover the majority of the tasks and duties on those lists. Okay? That's where you're going to find the minimum requirements of qualifications, whether the minimum is a diploma, whether it's a bachelor degree, or whether it's a certificate for.
Okay.
That's where you're going to find a whole list of the duties and tasks related to that occupation. I don't like to call it a Bible.
Okay.
Because it's not. It's a piece of statistics.
Yes.
But unfortunately, we have to treat it as a Bible.
Okay.
Because that's what they use.
So in any application that I'm going to make, I'm going to be tested based on that.
Yes, your background, your experience, your qualifications are going to be tested against that.
For example, if my occupation, that's a description in Australian terms, that's how I need to focus on.
That's right. People should not get confused. It's not a legal description of an occupation. It doesn't mean if you go and work for a company in Australia, those are the jobs you're going to be doing. Yes. So don't go to Fair Work afterwards and say, but they're making me do this 11th thing that wasn't on the list. Yes. It's a piece of statistics.
Okay, just for the immigration use.
Yeah, it's not just for the immigration. It's it's from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and it's not just for immigration. Okay. It's an indication of how the market works. And if you've got these tasks, it also helps define them. If you want people to do 1, 2, 3, 4 things, then this is the occupation you're looking for. So it does assist in a lot of ways in the market.
Yes. Apart from my occupation, because you mentioned about the point system.
System, I'll get that to you very easily. Point system counts on age. Okay. So when we start, there's a maximum of 30 points you can get on that. So you've got somebody aged between 24 to 32, gets a maximum of 30 points, and then starts dropping to the age of 50.
Okay.
Qualifications, they start from a diploma and start going upwards to a bachelor and a doctorate with a maximum of 20 points. Your English test, okay, I will use the IELTS as a base because it's more easily known. You need 6s across the board in order to be eligible to put in an expression of interest to apply, because these have got different processes. A 7 across the board gives you 10 points, an 8 across the board gives you 20 points. Okay. Your experience, depending on whether it's Australian experience or overseas experience, and on the years, gives you points as well. And there's a few other little 5-pointers here and there that you can pick up.
If I have a family, does this work against me?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't?
It doesn't. In fact, your partner who may be qualified in an occupation on the sole list can actually go through migration skills assessment and give you points. Even though the visa comes under yours. Okay. So yeah, these are little 5-pointers that exist on the list.
Make a difference, isn't it?
They do make a difference. You need a minimum of 60 points to be allowed to put in an expression of interest. Because what happens in these cases, you put in an expression of interest and that goes into a pool. Okay, you nominate which occupation you're putting this in for. Immigration picks out people. So obviously if you just got 6 and somebody else has got 80, they'll get the first invitation. They invite people to put in an application, then you've got 2 months to put in your application.
Okay.
And your application has to match what you put in your expression of interest, otherwise it gets refused.
That's right.
So these are visas where you don't need to have a sponsor. There is one category, one subclass that's got a nomination by state. That's when we go and look at the state lists. And if a nomination, like if an occupation is found by the Victorian government that it's required in Victoria, then they put that on the state list, which means that then you can ask for a nomination, but you do that through your expression of interest.
Nomination is not the same as sponsorship?
No, it's not. It basically says the state looks at your qualifications and says, we would like this person to come and live in Victoria and work here. So they're not actually taking you on for a job. Finding a job is your business, with these visas. Okay, they assess that you are wanted in Australia, you have the right and good qualifications to be in Australia, and you are going to offer it to the community here. So they will give you that permanent visa. But finding a job, it's up to you. And be careful, because people don't get benefits for 2 years, so make sure you find jobs.
Exactly.
But you can work on any job you want. I had to say that.
Okay, that was my question. That means if I come on my own without a sponsor and I'm successful, and I land in Aussie land, so for 2 years you just mentioned now, I do not have any other benefits but to work.
Exactly, and you don't have any medical. I mean, you've got to cover yourself on everything for 2 years. The usual period, that's say the 104 weeks. But you may have applied and been approved because you're an excellent civil engineer. You come here, nobody's employing you. Nothing's stopping you from working as a barman.
Okay. Right. Kelly, thank you very much. We did have 4 programs so far, and I think it's very, very useful information, and a very hot topic about immigration, and can be very hot for some people and relaxed for those who do have the permanent residency in Australia. To our viewers, thank you for staying with us. We're going to be back next week at the same time.